Come in a little bit of breaking news here on a Wednesday afternoon. BA, I'm sure you were starting to see the comments and concerns hosting your show. What's wrong with Georgia recruiting? They're not getting a lot of commits. They're, not near the top of the recruiting rankings. I got an email this morning about it. And sure enough, Zayden Walker answers the call. 5-star inside linebacker, the number one linebacker in the country for the 2025 recruiting class out of Schley County down there in South Georgia, out of Elville, Georgia, I believe, announces his commitment to Georgia. He's the number 10 commitment in the class right now, the number one ranked defensive player in the class. And BA, normally this would be massive news for, I think, 99% of the programs in college football. But for a Georgia program that signed the number one linebacker in the country a year ago in Justin Williams out of Texas, 2 years ago they landed C.J. Allen, who already looks like a stud. This is just business as usual when it comes to Georgia and specifically recruiting that inside linebacker position.
Yeah, I think I agree with your overall point here, which I don't think the Walker recruitment has probably gotten as much attention as it probably deserves. The truth is I think below the surface here, this one's maybe been more fascinating than we've given it credit for. I mean, obviously Miami's been a pretty big factor here. We know that's a program that's willing to spend pretty big. But I mean, I was led to believe, not like inside information, but just, talking to people, that South Carolina was really trying to make a big push here. And the comparison I would almost make it to, and this is probably not a perfect comparison, but like when Williams Nwaneri went to Missouri, it's like for some of these programs, they can't sign the overall depth that Georgia can, but they can certainly reach out to elite prospects and say, hey, we need you more. We want you back. We want you more. We can make you more of a recruiting priority than Georgia can. And so therefore, sometimes that can be an effective pitch. And I had kind of wondered, well, in the case of, Walker here, would this just be South Carolina more desperate for a player of this caliber and therefore, more easily able to win? But I guess that's just not going to be the case, that Georgia is just going to sign the best dadgum linebacker in America like every year. I mean, this is one of the most predictable outcomes in any given recruiting class, that Glenn Schuman, a little bit like Todd Hartley on the offensive side of the ball, just sort of always gets his guy or his handful of guys here. Georgia's about as much of a sure thing when it comes to inside linebacker play as, any recruiting machine's going to be able to be. So I do think that this one's kind of flown under the radar, that Georgia has fought off a couple of programs that really wanted Walker badly. And Georgia was just, I guess, able to make a better pitch here. So this is going to probably be maybe a more impressive recruiting win than some people are going to give it credit for, because I think they've kind of gotten really used to seeing Georgia win these kinds of recruiting battles.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the fact that it just seemed like Georgia was once again going to sign the number one linebacker in the country in Zayden Walker, it flew under the radar a little bit. South Carolina signed Walker's brother out of Schley County a year ago, 4-star player and a good prospect there as well. Miami, look, we know they're willing to spend big in the NIL space there, and Georgia just goes in and sort of does what they continue to do at that inside linebacker position. And, look, we can sit here and say, path to the field and whatnot. A season ago, we saw Georgia play two freshmen, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson, in big spots late in the season there, especially in that Alabama game. And I believe they both ended up starting that Orange Bowl win over Florida State. So you can't, I think, point to, he's going to go sit on the bench for a few years. We're going to see these guys come in and play right away. Jalen Walker, they find ways to get him on the field. I know this is going to be Smile Munden's final year in the program. Georgia finds way to do things at linebackers. They're going to play them all over the place. They're going to get multiple guys drafted. You think in that 2021 team, Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, and Channing Tindall all go in the first 3 rounds there. And look, even like a guy like Jamon Dumas Johnson, who's now at Kentucky, he's probably going to be one of the better linebackers in the SEC next season. And his time at Georgia undoubtedly, I think, helped him. And the fact that Georgia still finds ways to get guys playing time there absolutely factors into that. I'm glad you brought up Todd Hartley, because I think Todd Hartley and Glenn Schuman, two of the longest tenured members on this Georgia staff now, continue to just dominate their position. They get their work done early, and they land the best players in the country. Georgia has 2 5-star commitments at this point in time, Elias Williams and Zayden Walker, both in-state kids, both South Georgia kids. Georgia goes down, lands both of them, locks both of them up, it seems to be. So Georgia, again, and we'll get deeper and deeper into recruiting here when Jeff Sentell joins us fresh off vacation, back with us here shortly. As they continue to recruit well, they bet on their strengths. I would expect Georgia to sign a great offensive line class. And then the biggest thing with this recruiting class that I think you and I both probably want to see moving forward, how do they continue to recruit defensive linemen, and what do they do at that position? Because that's sort of the thing that I think, in my opinion, is going to determine how successful this recruiting class ultimately ends up being.
Yeah, I think also coming off the official visit weekend this past weekend, we had heard certainly plenty of, whispers, rumor, innuendo that it had all gone really well for Georgia. And yet I do understand the fan response of, yeah, but show me the trophy on the wall to really prove that. And obviously the what's wrong with Georgia recruiting is a little bit of a, joke and a meme at this point. But still, you hear, oh boy, it went great for Georgia this weekend, wink, wink. And, we kind of gotten very used to that. But it's also nice if you're a Georgia fan to see that punctuation mark of, in fact, here's how well it went. A guy like Zaden Walker is now ready to commit to Georgia. So I do think that in addition to saying a lot of good things about, what Georgia's able to do against some of the other competitors for Walker, I think it also says something really, I guess really well about what Georgia did for its official visits this past weekend, because a lot of those official visitors are also guys that fans are hoping to hear some good news with before the summer comes to an end. And maybe in a lot of ways, Walker and his decision today kind of foreshadows some of that.
Yeah, and I think you look at this official visit weekend. These are this past weekend, this first weekend, and this second weekend right here are when Georgia, I think, really puts the pedal to the metal in terms of recruiting. You're only allowed to host 56 official visitors each year, and so while kids can now take unlimited official visits, schools are still somewhat hamstrung by who they can actually go out there and recruit. They had 17 official visitors last weekend on campus for themselves. Zaden Walker being among them, but they had 5 commits: Ryan Montgomery, Elias Williams, also in there. They're also going to have a big slew of official visitors this weekend. And if Georgia's going to sign the number 1 class, a lot of the visitors, both this coming weekend, guys like David Sanders Jr., DJ Pickett, and this past weekend, you think guys like Zaden Walker, Elias Williams are going to have to make up that class, because that's how they do it. I think what Georgia does better than almost anyone is how they go out and lock down these visits. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the worst Georgia recruiting class was that 2021 class in recent years, where they finished number 4 overall. Now, mind you, they still signed Brock Bowers and Amarius Mims in that class. But Georgia wasn't able to host visits and host visitors in an official capacity during that recruiting cycle. And so with these official visits, I think you've already seen the dividends pay off. Landing Zayden Walker. Travis Smith is another big one that I think a lot of us are interested going forward. I believe Elijah Griffith is visiting this weekend, though not in an official capacity there as far as what I've seen. CJ Wiley, wide receiver out of Milton, someone to follow there. So from an official visit standpoint, 95% of Georgia's recruiting work is going to be done in these next 2 weeks, and they're going to have a great idea of how this class is going to play out. And to already get a guy like Zaden Walker in the boat, I think is only further encouraging for what Georgia continues to build in this class.
To go back to the theme of this decision by Walker today being probably an underrated story, let me give you another example for why I think that's true. As Glenn Schuman has taken on more defensive coaching responsibility, his recruiting efforts, at least the best that I can tell, have not dropped off at all. And I'm a massive fan of Dan Lanning. I think that Lanning is one of the great coaches in college football right now. And I think he was an incredibly valuable asset for Georgia. I don't know that Georgia won I don't know the defense in 2021 would have been as dominant as it was if not for Dan Lanning's influence. I really like Dan Lanning a lot. But this is a point that you brought up before. When Lanning became defensive coordinator, the outside linebacker recruiting for Georgia did dip just a bit. Well, as Glenn Schuman has taken on more defensive coaching responsibilities, we haven't seen his position coach recruiting dip really at all. He seems to be able to do double duty very, very well. And he should probably get some credit for that, because he is making all of this look far easier than it probably is.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point made there. And it also, I think, speaks to Kirby Smart here a little bit as well, in terms of, you look at his Georgia defenses, they've cycled through defensive coordinators now. Mel Tucker, Dan Lanning, Will Muschamp was involved briefly there as well. But Georgia's defenses have always been at their best, in my opinion, when they're getting great inside linebacker play, be it, Roquan Smith, obviously, Nakobe Dean there as well. And you can look at this 2023 defensive season ago. Injuries, I think, a big reason why that team, and specifically that defense, just did not have the season that I think a lot of people anticipate them having. I know we've said a lot about the defensive line here, but Small London dealing with a foot injury all season. Jamon Dumas-Johnson breaking his arm, I think, really impacted that defense late in the year. And so the ability to have great linebacker play consistently, I think, is a hallmark not just of Glenn Schuman, but of Kirby Smart as well, and how he wants this defense to be built and have a really strong spine up the defense. You think they've always had great safeties, productive safeties, and great inside linebacker play. And so landing a Zayden Walker in this regard, I think helps moving forward. And even when the day comes that Glenn Schuman does become a head coach, and I do think that day is one day coming, I think Schuman is also at a point where, he doesn't need to just go take a Sunbelt job to take a Sunbelt job. He doesn't need to go the Billy Napier route in my mind. He can afford, I think now similar to like Dan Lanning, to be patient, continue to be well compensated at Georgia, making over $1.7 million a year, and build great defenses. And then when a job comes open that he wants, not dissimilar to the way Kirby Smart did it, wait for the right opportunity where he can step in right away and succeed, like I think Lanning has done at Oregon.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's almost been a luxury that you would not have anticipated that Georgia would have been able to hold on to Glenn Schuman for as long as it has. Dan Lanning very quickly becomes, to get the Oregon head coaching job as young as he was, I thought that was a major deal for Lanning, and a credit to his, I guess, sort of up and coming status as a coach that he got that. But that's sort of the same track you thought that Glenn Schuman might be on, and I don't think there's any reason to doubt that he isn't on that. Right? He probably still is. But Georgia has gotten kind of a long tenure for a guy like Schuman. And you mentioned Todd Hartley. That's a guy that, if we're going to go back pre-NIL, pre-transfer portal, then maybe being the head coach in some group of five status, maybe that would be the best next job for guys like this, because that's how you work your way up. But with so much talent transferring away from group of fives and going to a place they can get paid, I don't know that the group of five head coaching jobs are worth what they once were. Now, obviously, for a guy like Del McGee, that was something he couldn't pass up to go to Georgia State. But I do think the current landscape of college football has devalued some of these coaching jobs. And all of a sudden now, sort of previous next steps for coaches don't really exist the way they once did. And so therefore, these guys are like, well, I'm getting paid, seven figures to do a job here at Georgia that I'm clearly good at. So let me just sort of keep doing this for a little bit longer. This is one of those kind of weird latent benefits that Georgia's getting from the current landscape of the sport. I do believe it's allowing Georgia to keep some quality assistants longer than it would have if this were like, say, 5 or certainly 10 years ago.
Absolutely. I think Del McGee left because it was either, if you don't take the Georgia State head coaching job now, you might never be a head coach. And 8 seasons at Georgia, and it's worth pointing out, he's older than Glenn Schuman is. Glenn Schuman is still somehow only 34 years old,
right,
despite entering his 9th season at Georgia this year. And I think Todd Hartley, a similar boat, a similar young assistant, not quite 9 years, but I believe this will be his 6th year coming up at the University of Georgia. And so the fact that they're able to hold on, look, you and I can go round and round about NIL, transfer portal, how that has negatively impacted the sport, but you're 100% right in my mind in keeping Georgia, I think, at the top, and keeping these great assistants for so long has helped Georgia in that regard. And that's why you're able to see them year after year continue to land elite prospects like a Zaden Walker and do the things necessary to keep that inside linebacker room at the top of the country there. I'm excited to see what this inside linebacker room looks like this year, obviously before Zaden Walker gets there. You have Small Munden, who in theory is just going to be a lot healthier than he was a season ago. You have Jalen Walker, who I am the president of the Jalen Walker fan club, and I look forward to seeing how he gets on the field this year. And then year 2 of guys like a CJ Allen, a Raylan Wilson, not to mention some of the talented freshmen that they brought in. I know Brian Hartline is a flashy name that'll get thrown out there. In my mind, no one does a better job of keeping their linebacker room stocked in the country rather than Glenn Schuman there. So I think he just continues to do what he does better than almost anyone. And the fact that he's able to once again land Zaden Walker, and to the point where it had sort of like, again, as we touched on, flown under the radar, this recruitment, where, again, years past, you think of how much we talked up Nakobe Dean back in that 2019 recruiting cycle. This just sort of seemed like a done deal, and maybe part of it too is, Jeff being on vacation this past week, a well-deserved vacation nonetheless. But it just seems like this recruitment flew under the radar. It was a big surprise that he even announced his commitment today. I believe he had previously announced a commitment date of July 5th. That Georgia's so easily able to go in and win right away, I think is a big thing. And look at this. He was waiting until 8 o'clock tonight to make his debut, but pull them in. We have Jeff Sentell here on with us to break down the big commitment of Zaden Walker, 5-star linebacker. Jeff, what are the Bulldogs getting here?
So funny, guys. I see Brandon is efforting as well. So it's funny. Sometimes we do these jobs, and I kind of knew that Zayden was imminent, but like we just got back from a cruise in Alaska. My wife's sick. I had to go pick the dog from the kennel. We come out of the kennel and there's a funeral procession on Highway 92 in Woodstock. So like we are efforting in the terms of the business. Guys, Zayden is pretty cool. I'm sure you guys have already debated the nuances of how the correct pronunciation and phonetics work for Sly County in Ellaville, Georgia. And I mean, this is, I don't know how Glenn Schuman keeps getting better and better and better. It's like he is the Barry Bonds recruiter right now. And I'm talking prime enhancement era Barry Bonds as well. Like, this guy's juiced on the trail. Like, for him to go into a room and say, hey, Zayden, yeah, there's probably 3 5 stars, 2 number ones. You want to be a part of this, right? You want to be a part of this. And I think that you guys have probably touched a lot of bases. Here's what you're going to see out of Zaden Walker really early. I think it's a hybrid role. I think it's going to look a lot like the role you got with Jalen Walker, pass rush extraordinaire early. And then it's going to take a lot for him to learn the Georgia defense. Here's why I say this is because the ones that play quick at Georgia are the ones that are inside linebackers already in high school. That's what they do. Now, Zayden has been an outside rush guy. He's been all over the place. I saw him last year before the Auburn game. He caught a couple of passes, man. He was working as a tight end. He was blocking. They were going to try to give him the football to run it some. And you know what everybody says, like, golden era about this right now, but there's really no standard anywhere for this, for what Georgia is doing. I thought when Georgia added Raylan Wilson and they added C.J. Allen and they had 3 top 10 linebackers in that class, and then they go back next year and get 2 5 stars and then another top 10, top 15 linebacker in the country and Christopher Jones. And now you add a piece like Zayden Walker, who becomes Georgia's 10th commitment. I don't know what other way to describe it as Georgia is recruiting on the top of the mountain, and they were already at the top of the mountain, and they keep finding more stairways, more levels here.
One of the things I talk about a lot too are the idea of the premium positions in football, and for the most part, inside linebacker is not always what we consider a premium position, especially if you measure by who typically gets drafted high in the first round, things like that. That's not always a position you see doing that a lot. But at a place like Georgia, I do think you have to consider inside linebacker to be a much more premium position. Roquan Smith, as I get, and Connor knows this better than I do, one of the few inside linebackers to sort of really cash in recent years with a major, sort of free agency type contract. Obviously, great teams like the 2017 that made the playoff the first time, the first national championship team in 2021. They had Buckus Award linebackers. I don't think that's necessarily a coincidence, but Jeff rattled through the names. Connor, you and I have kind of rattled through some of those names there as well. That some of the best players to come through Georgia during the Kirby Smart era have been the inside linebackers, and the best defensive performances for UGA during this era seem to always include really top-notch linebacker play. So I do believe this is a position at Georgia, and I'm not smart enough from a football stance necessarily explain why this is, but this is a position that just seems to matter more at Georgia than it does for other teams' defenses.
And I agree with that there. And to Jeff's point as well, you hear the Jalen Walker, and Jalen Walker, in my mind, is one of the more interesting players to write and talk about, because I think you see so obviously his talent and why he's one of the best players on this defense. And it can be tough to find a bit of a home for him. And so I think that the fact that Georgia's able to sell that to a guy like Zaden Walker, who could have gone to Miami, who could have gone to South Carolina and played right away and found a way onto the field, I think speaks to not just what Glenn Schuman has been able to continue to do, but what Kirby Smart has been able to continue to do in terms of pitching an overall plan for not just players, but their future development as well. And so as NIL becomes a bigger thing and transfer portal and whatnot, and the worry that comes with that, Georgia's still able to go out there and win these major recruitments.
I think, guys, and there's a couple things to say. I think the big picture on this one, besides Georgia just dominating and Schuman, brush your shoulders off Glenn Schuman, I think really it's an example of how he shuts it down so early after the Georgia official, because he was going to hear the what is that line from Gladiator? Honey potion poured into his ears, with maybe some dollars and cents and so everything else from Miami, the same thing. He was going to get wooed, man. And he was like, dude, I don't want to be wooed. I want to be a dog. And he was one of those young men from probably the first time I saw him, first time I talked to him. I'm like, yeah, That's Georgia all the way. That guy, there's a lot of guys in this class that I'm going to look back when we have our reviews, and if they're not dogs, I'm going to be stunned. And Zayden Walker was always one of those guys. But leave it to Brandon here to get the old thought tree rolling here, Brandon. Let's just do something fun. Here's a good thought exercise, okay? What do you think is the gold standard position now at Georgia? I think you think tight end. I think you think linebacker. I think you think offensive tackle. Those might be. And I think those positions have kind of maybe eclipsed the running back position a little bit. Like if you had to sit there and say, Connor, you see it all the time, who's DBU, who's LBU, who's RBU. I would think right now, those are three positions that I think Georgia is going to stake its claim that they can get anybody they want, provided they push.
Yeah, I think those positions are all worthy. Now you could kind of say, well, okay, of those three, who ranks, wherever, and I guess you could also include safety in that discussion perhaps as well. But yeah, I mean, you can't really do better at linebacker than Georgia's done. You can do as well as that, and tight end, I guess, has, and Bowers being the all-time great, maybe that, gives the nod there. But it's hard to do better at any position than Georgia's done in terms of targeting players, getting the players that it's targeted, and then turning those players into high-level performers while they're at Georgia. Man, it's just a really high batting average on all that.
Does it bother you, BA, that we didn't include defensive line U in there yet?
Certainly there'd be one more national championship, I believe, if that defensive line play had perhaps been just a little bit better this past year. No disrespect to the guys who obviously played for Georgia. Some of that may have been just additional bodies would have helped out in the rotation, but a little bit better defensive line play, and you could be talking about at least one more national championship probably.
Look, Georgia's got the best linebacker recruiting, the best offensive tackle development, the best tight end recruiting and development, and BA is still not satisfied. And I think Kirby Smart would just absolutely love that.
It's funny, BA. BA is never going to get his wide receiver recruiting or anything else like that. But we had a hiccup for maybe a year with DLU, and I think this is going to be returned. Maybe not in the NFL draft, but I think it's going to be returned in the 2025 recruiting class, where we're going to look back at that class and go, yeah, not much you can say there. That's another 565-foot Mickey Mantle shot in terms of what Georgia intends to do, what Georgia is trending to do, and what they should do.
I love it.
So we'll wrap it up here. Final thoughts. BA, Georgia Lane's a 5-star linebacker or someone who covers Georgia on a day in, day out basis. What is your final thought on Georgia landing Zaden Walker here?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what I said a moment ago among the many things we've said, which is it makes that first visit weekend look really, really successful. And it kind of validates the people who were saying it was successful, which I think makes you excited about what Georgia can do in this second weekend coming up, where there are all kinds of whispers about, so-and-so making a surprise unofficial visit. And obviously the list of official visitors is distinguished, which Jeff, I know, will be telling us more about. So getting a guy to drop his commitment right now, kind of middle of the afternoon, middle of the week like this, lets you know that we really are here. And this moment really is happening now as the 2025 class starts to really, really take shape in the weeks to come.
And Jeff, we know you've got a show to preview tonight before the Hedges. Give us a nice little tease of what you got. Obviously, the Zaden Walker news, the big headline here, but I got a feeling that's not all you got lined up for us.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I would imagine for Georgia and DawgNation, it would be like the DawgNation team adding another Connor, adding another Mike level talent to the linebacker room when they're already loaded in those capacities. But let me see if I can channel some inner Brandon Adams with some teas. On the Hedges tonight, we're going to try and talk about one thing Georgia did with its official visits this past weekend that kind of sets a new standard nationally for something that maybe wasn't as cool as it used to be, and Georgia found a way to kind of flip the script, remix it a little bit, and Georgia's again doing something with its OVs as well as anybody in the country.
So you're going to have to tune in tonight before the Hedges, get the full download from Jeff Sentell there. Brandon Adams for Mr. Jeff Sentell. I'm Connor Riley, breaking down the big news of the day for Georgia. They landed the number 1 inside linebacker in the country in Zaden Walker, a 5-star commitment for the Bulldogs. They now have 10 in the class, and they're not done yet. So we'll continue to keep you guys updated on this recruiting class and everything that happens here at Georgia at DawgNation.com. Make sure to keep checking in. Thank you guys so much for joining us here this afternoon.